Hello and welcome to GradCast, the official radio show and podcast of the Society of Graduate Students at Western University. I'm your host, Liam Clifford.
And I'm your co-host, Gavin Tolometti.
And today we're here with Lauren Stone, a PhD student in the Geology and Planetary Science departments. Lauren, you're very welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So, Lauren, do you want to open up our conversation, which I believe will be quite fruitful, to say the least today, by telling us a little bit about yourself and the research you do here at Western?
Sure, yeah. So I just started this year. I started my master's and just recently rolled it into a PhD. And my research looks at endoliths, which are microbes that live within rocks. And specifically, I look at endoliths, impact craters. So microbes living within the rocks on crater floors. And often when we think of, impact cratering in the context of biology, we think of, all the dinosaurs dying or some other catastrophic damage to life. But actually geological changes that can occur when that meteorite impacts Earth can increase the habitability of the impacted rock for microbes that might colonize it after impact. So for example, the high temperatures and pressures that occur during impact can increase the porosity or the empty space within the rocks at the crater floor. And so you have more surface area that microbes can move into, but you also have, an increase in the types of light that microbes can use for photosynthesis. And also these environments are really good at protecting microbes from extreme conditions, like extremes of temperatures and radiation. And so the idea is that if impact shock rocks or impact craters are a good place to find life in extreme environments here on Earth, then maybe that's also the case in other planetary bodies like Mars, where you do have extremes of temperatures and radiation, humidity, things like that. And so, of course, we don't have actual samples from Martian craters, unfortunately, but the next best thing to look at is samples from craters here on Earth that are formed in basalt, which is the primary type of rock on the Martian surface. And Dr. Alexandra Pontefract at Georgetown University had collected samples from two of these basaltic craters in Brazil. And the samples were taken at sort of varying distances from the centers of the craters. So they experienced different levels of shock and different changes based from the impact itself. So what we're doing now is trying to see if there's sort of correlation between the shock level of a given rock sample, meaning the amount it was altered by impact, and the diversity of microbes within that sample, which would suggest, of course, that impact-related changes to the rock increase its habitability.
It's very interesting that this all has connections to trying to understand the origin of life. And for a geologic process that we normally, as you said, consider to be extremely destructive, could actually be very, life-bringing in the end, that it's producing these environments where microbes can thrive. And I guess I have a couple questions on that. I guess the first one is, do the microbes, after the rocks have been shocked along the crater floors, do the microbes come from an environment outside and migrate into these new shocked rocks? Or do they come from maybe deeper down, that maybe the crater has opened up almost like a pathway for them to come close to the surface? That might be a bit of a stretchful question.
No, yeah, there are definitely microbes very deep down. But in either case, when you have an impact, of course, it's going to sterilize the surface. Any microbes there can't withstand the temperatures and pressures of that impact. So microbes could come from below if they're deep under that target rock, but primarily we're probably looking at microbes that are moving in from the surrounding areas.
Very good. Now, Lauren, I know you had said that one of the specific rock types you were focusing on was basalt. Now,
Yep.
if I access my primary education and the three types of rocks, am I correct in saying that is an igneous rock?
Yes, I am not a geologist, I should specify. I'm a biologist. Gavin probably knows more about this.
I can confirm that it is an igneous rock.
Okay. And that's the one that is formed after lava breaches the surface and then cools, correct?
Yeah, so the craters in Brazil that we're looking at, the basalt had come from, I believe, volcanic deposits hundreds of millions of years ago. And then the impact or the meteorites crashed into those rocks.
And the craters that you mentioned that Dr. Alexandra Pontefract went to collect samples, how big are we talking? Are we talking about maybe a couple kilometers, the size of meteor crater that's in Arizona, or are we talking about the size of craters that wiped out the dinosaurs?
So we're talking sort of medium-ish size craters. I believe one of them is around 9.5 kilometers in diameter and the other is around 12.4.
So a decently sized crater, I would say.
Yeah.
Enough to probably do a substantial amount of damage to the environment.
For sure.
But maybe create a very habitable environment soon after the event's all over. So
that's hopefully that's what there is evidence to suggest that in other craters, but we want to confirm that in basalts.
And when you're searching for, because you mentioned as you were moving further out from the center of the crater, wanted to see how the types of microbes maybe change, or the species change, and how diverse they become.
Yep.
What do the shocked rocks themselves look like as you move further out? Have you gotten a chance to see how they maybe change? You mentioned porosity and how much free space they have.
Yeah.
Do you notice that there's maybe more free space in the center of the crater and it gets less further out?
Yeah, so I actually haven't had a chance to look at them myself, but I've read work done by a previous graduate student, Nicole Posnov, before me, who did sort of work on those rocks themselves and did find increased porosity more so towards the center of the crater, where you would get increased pressures and temperatures.
And it's amazing how we come full circle, because Nicole is currently a GradCast member. So shout out, Nicole. We hope your research is going well. How old are these impact craters? Like, are we talking millions and millions of years ago?
Yes, so both around 120 to 130 million years ago. There's been sort of, people have hypothesized that potentially they formed at the same time, either from two meteorites or from one that split in half, but there isn't any substantial evidence for that. We would need more info on the exact times that the meteorites hit.
And since they only formed, and since we think about the origin of life, where we hypothesize it probably happened maybe about 3.5 to maybe 4 billion years ago, and the environment on Earth then is would have been completely different, especially how it's compared to now, and it's probably still what it was like over 100 million years ago. Do you think that would probably something you've been considering when you maybe look at the microbes that probably inhabited the shocked rocks, this crater, if it formed much later from when we had expected microbial life to have arisen on Earth?
So, I mean, it's not exactly answering your question, but right now, an issue that we're facing is that these craters have been sort of taken over by vegetation. And so a lot of the microbes that we're seeing are, it's dominantly affected by the types of vegetation. So a lot of the microbes are things that use plants to get nutrients. So they're plant symbionts and things like that. So I mean, it depends. I'm not sure I can answer that yet without results.
That's fair, but it must be a bit frustrating when you see all these plants, you're thinking like, you're just ruining all of this. Or you're making it harder for me to find out which one of these microbes does not belong with any of these plants.
For sure. But I mean, hopefully what we'll see is that the number of types of different microbes, or the diversity of microbes, correlates somewhat with the shock level.
Very good. And so, with all of this in mind, what was the drive to start looking at impact cratering for life? Because so often, as Gavin mentioned earlier, we view it as inherently destructive, bringing about the end of a world, so to speak, as we see in movies. So what made microbiologists and other relevant scientists look towards these things for signs of life?
Yeah, so a lot of biologists and people who look at the origins of life and early life actually still don't think of impact craters too much. But recently there's been sort of more of a drive to look at them, because, you know, we know that in extreme environments like the Arctic, living within rocks protects microbes from life. So, I mean, first of all, you have people discovering these microbes living in extreme environments. That's one big push. But then also there was research done by Dr. Azinski's group with Dr. Pontefract, looking at an impact crater in the Canadian high Arctic, the hot and impact structure in gneisses, not basalts. But they did find this relationship that we're looking for here, where the shock level of a given rock sample, meaning the amount it was altered by impact, did increase with increasing diversity of the microbes that were living within it.
Yeah, because it's very interesting, because like usually when we think about trying to how life maybe have arisen, a lot of people would probably think, oh, maybe it was from something that came from the depths of the ocean. It just happened, the right chemical reaction just happened to have occurred, but we're not entirely sure how, whether it was from maybe a volcanic eruption, a lightning strike hitting the right place. But then I think it's as soon as you say meteorite cratering, impact cratering, you're like, oh no, that's too destructive. It can't be this. And then there's
no, go ahead.
And then I was just going to say that there's the whole argument about, did maybe meteorites were also what brought the microbes that were able to populate early Earth to Earth from space. They may have come from a different source, but
for sure. Yeah. So about something about you said earlier. So a lot of people, when they're thinking about the origins of life, sort of the big theory is submarine hydrothermal vents. But again, those can be created by impact events. We can get the generation of a hydrothermal system, which is essentially just like hot water interacting with rock. We can get those at impact craters. Impact craters can generate those hydrothermal systems, and you know, especially in the context of Mars, where we haven't had liquid water for a long time, or at least on the surface. It's important that impact craters can form these hydrothermal systems, because we could have sort of transient liquid water from an impact event that sort of creates this hydrothermal system and melts water ice.
Very good. And I think that, you know, inevitably the conversation was going to come up with Mars again, because we are trying to utilize examples here on Earth to understand more about the solar system. How do you find the the applicability carries over to Mars? You know, is this providing, you know, sort of a good barometer, or are there other considerations that need to take place when making this comparison?
Sure. So, I mean, I would say that looking at basaltic craters on Earth is the best analog we can get for now. And ultimately, the hope is that this research will sort of help to contribute to this growing body of evidence that impact craters are important on Mars when we're searching for life. But absolutely, there are many differences between impact craters here on Earth versus Mars. And actually, an experiment we're planning on doing is sort of to help address that, where I'm going to take samples of these rocks that I have from impact craters in Brazil and sort of incubate them under Mars-like conditions, with the hope of looking at how microbes utilize those rocks under Martian conditions.
Yeah.
Under what, sorry, Gavin, I just have a follow-up question. Under what pretenses can we simulate Martian conditions? You know, how do we conceive of controlling and constructing an environment that simulates what Mars is actually like? What sort of specifications go into that?
Yeah, so that's a tough question, especially because we don't have all of the information about what Mars really was like, especially in its like early years. There's a lot of debate around that. So, I mean, really, we have to sort of pick something that will be accepted by planetary scientists as a potential Mars-like condition. So, in particular, right now we're looking at making it sort of anaerobic, meaning there's no oxygen in the atmosphere, because that's relevant to Mars, obviously, which is in itself very complicated to construct. But also figuring out temperatures and things like that. We're looking at maybe sort of trying to replicate a crater lake on Mars, similar to what Jezero crater, where the Perseverance rover landed, would have been. So we're trying to figure out, what sort of water temperature do you want to think of? What nutrients would be in there that microbes could utilize, et cetera.
And regarding the temperature, I'm guessing we would expect maybe early Mars to be still cooler as compared to Earth, since it is further away from the sun, I'm guessing.
Yeah, so there's a lot of debate about that. But in the context of impact craters, like I was talking about earlier, they can generate these hydrothermal systems. So we can get heat from that impact. So the heat of the crater lake, it doesn't necessarily have to correlate super strongly with the heat of Mars itself, the temperature of Mars itself. We can get a transient increased temperature at that hydrothermal system.
Yeah, because I've seen it a lot in the planetary science community, the debate on how long will the residual heat from an impact crater last if it does produce a hydrothermal system. And I know there's the whole arguments people have, like, oh, it'll probably last maybe like a few tens, thousands of years, and others will say, no, it could last for hundreds of thousands of years. And then and that could be the difference between something will start to grow but will die halfway, and this could create a microbial ecosystem.
Sure, yeah. And I mean, if life could evolve in this sort of transient hydrothermal system, we have to consider whether it could have evolved enough to survive past that, whether it could have evolved to survive even to today.
And is there any discernible objective way to determine just how hot these impact craters got? Could we throw a ballpark estimate at it just to sort of, give a bit of context for what we're talking about?
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, again, that's not work that I do. I'm a biologist. I don't really know much about that, but I think modeling has been done. And I mean, to give a ballpark, I would say we could get up to sort of the hundreds of degrees. In terms of this experiment, I'm looking at probably more like 70 or 80. But I mean, again, the temperature would decrease as time goes on after the impact.
Yeah, Liam, just to add to that, it's a question of, do we look at the temperature? But Lauren, I'm assuming that you'd look at the residual temperature of what happens after maybe a few minutes or so, a few years after the impact events happened. Everything's like really calmed down. Because
immediately it would be too hot.
Because
for life.
There's a lot of modeling that suggests that the split second a meteorite bombardment event happens, the temperatures can, for a split second, be above 5,000 Kelvin, and then we'll average around 2,000 degrees Celsius. So it would definitely be that's vaporizing rock temperatures there.
Certainly not microbial appropriate temperatures.
Of course not. And I always ask those questions knowing that the answer is often much more complex to come up with, just based on a number of factors. Now, I do think it's important to always ask this question is, I had come up with a question that said, what spurred on this interest? Was it an interest in rocks, or was it an interest in life? And you've quasi answered that question, but I will rephrase it to give you the benefit of the doubt.
So definitely the interest in life for me. I'm primarily a biologist, but I think a lot of times biologists have a tendency to ignore geology, but I don't think that we can have a conversation about the origins of life without talking about geology. You can't have an origin of life without looking at where it's getting its nutrients, most likely sort of from minerals surrounding it in the rock.
Yeah, it just brings up how much cross collaboration is really needed across the sciences to try and answer the bigger questions that one science field can't get all the answers they need. And
Absolutely. That's why I'm grateful, of course, for Western's Planetary Sciences program and the fact that, the Planetary Sciences itself is an institute and you have all these people from different departments working together.
Yeah, it just goes to show you just how invaluable an interdisciplinary approach is when addressing these, quite complex and multifaceted issues. So, we talk about finding little microbes in rocks, but to the average person on the streets, they might not even bat an eye at this. So
Sure.
if you had to speak to someone about why this was important to continue, what would you say to them?
Sure. So, when we're thinking, I think a lot of people are interested in extraterrestrial life. If you just think about this, this thing about this, the states releasing a report on UFOs in June, whatever, there's so much interest around extraterrestrial life. And most likely that life would be microbial. The vast majority of life on Earth is microbial. And so we do have, we have all these rovers on Mars, we have all this research going on, but we can only cover so much ground when we're looking for microbes or signs of ancient life, like Perseverance is looking at. And so we have to think about, where do we start? Where do we start looking? And the goal of this research is to hopefully bring more awareness to the fact that maybe we should be starting at impact craters, like Perseverance is doing.
And would you say on with that, do you think the way we are trying to understand the origin of life now and how impact craters are formed, do you think we're probably, with the Perseverance rover on Mars, getting one step closer to maybe figuring out if life ever did exist on Mars in the past?
Yeah, hopefully. Who knows what's going to come out of it, but hopefully. I think most importantly, we're looking at sort of the mineralogy of the area. We're looking at the clays, because again, you can't have any conversation about life without determining what it's using as its habitat, as its energy source. And so hopefully, regardless of whether we find any like diagnostic features of, there was life here, we can figure out, could there be life here?
And is that, so I know we spoke about basalt earlier, forming the crux of their advantageous habitation, but are there any other rocks that would be prime candidates for such?
Yeah, so actually, this was proven first, this sort of correlation between shock level and microbial diversity, which suggests, that impact shocked rocks are a good place for life. This was proven first in gneisses. And actually it hasn't been proven in basalts. That's the goal here, is to figure out, is that also the case in basalts? Is that something that we would consider the case maybe on Mars?
And I'm guessing, would you say, if we were one day when we can actually finally get Martian samples, would you be one of the first to try and grab a heavily shocked or any shocked rock and say, like, pass me that, I need to know what's potentially lived inside those little pores?
That would be amazing.
And so
absolutely.
And there's one thing I think we didn't get to going back on a big circle, because it was something we didn't get to talk about so much. Like, we've been talking about a lot about microbes, being able to survive in these shocked rocks after a meteorite impact occurs. But how would you know and identify the species, and even tell if there were any species in there? Like, what type of techniques would you use? I guess this is when your biology background would really start to come in.
Yeah. So essentially what happens is, in the case of these rocks at least, they were subjected to something called next generation sequencing, or that we're working on that now, where you look at a specific DNA sequence in the genome of all of the microbes in the rock, and you compare it to a database of all known microbes. So you get this giant amount of it's this data. It basically just looks like a file with a bunch of letters in it, and try to compare those gene sequences to microbes that we know exist, and say, does it match up? Is it this microbe or not? Or is it this microbe? Essentially, that's what we call bioinformatics, where we we get the data in lab, of course, but then we have to figure it all out on the computer.
Of course. And you know, just for my own curiosity, how many documented microbes are there on Earth?
Oh boy.
Like, are we talking in the millions?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, billions. Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
I don't have an exact answer for you.
Yeah, no, and again, right, I wasn't expecting you to be right on the ball with it. It's it really contextualizes just how versatile life can be, whether it's on Earth or whether it's potentially somewhere else in our universe.
Yeah.
I think Liam really just wanted to know how many microbes are living on him right now.
Yeah, no, exactly.
A lot.
That's
so funny. Well, I hope most of them are harmless if they are living in fact on me.
I imagine Lauren, that most microbes, or almost all of them, must be like harmless, or else we'd be in a lot more trouble.
Yeah, and a lot of them are beneficial for us. That's why we eat yogurt.
And then we will keep to our Activia then. So, Lauren, we are coming towards the end of our interview. We always like asking about how COVID has impacted research, and everyone's answer is yes, it has. You know, because of reasons X, Y, and Z. What are yours?
Absolutely. Thankfully, I knew a lot of the techniques that I was going to be using coming in. And so I was able to sort of sort that out in lab by myself. But it's been difficult. And a lot of times I've had to troubleshoot by myself. I have sort of a mini at-home lab going because I am having trouble figuring out lab space that doesn't overlap too much with other people. But you make it work.
Of course, the resilience of life, you know, really does manifest itself in the resilience to secure a lab time. So we are with you on that one. I always like leaving off the interviews with one thing you want to leave the audience with today.
That's a good question. I would say the big thing that I push for is, you know, don't be scared of science and don't be scared of things you don't know. I am doing a PhD in geology and planetary sciences, and I came in not having any background in either. But especially in the context of astrobiology, but I mean, in science in general, we need people with different ideas than the norm, than what you're taught. And so everybody has something to offer. You don't have to know everything about everything. As long as you're willing to learn, you got this.
And I think that is an absolutely wonderful note to end off on. Lauren, we want to thank you very much for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure, and we hope you had some fun as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Not a problem. This has been GradCast, the official radio show and podcast of the Society of Graduate Students at Western University. I've been your host, Liam Clifford, and my co-host and producer for today was Gavin Tolometti. We've been speaking with Lauren Stone, a PhD student in geology and planetary science. If you would like to be involved with our show or get in contact with us, email us at gradcastradio.com. You can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter at GradCastRadio. To listen to us, we are on Radio Western 94.9. You can also find all of our episodes on our website at gradcast.ca or on podcast apps like Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Alternatively, select podcasts have been uploaded to YouTube at GradCast Radio. Thank you for listening and have a wonderful day.